Thank you for taking the time to watch our information session today on knowing your employment rights. So this is a two-part series that will help students get to know what your rights are in the workplace and get to know better how to advocate for yourself. So we are recording the session today. If folks join later on, then we'll stop the recording and there will be a chance to ask questions. We're very fortunate to have with us today as well Anne-Marie Langan, who's a lawyer with Peterborough Community Legal Center, Kristen Haines and Sarah Simpson from the Consent at Trent team, and Bree Polachicchio from the Trent Central Student Association. So we wanted to offer this series and this session because as students, you're getting to know kind of how to navigate your new professional experiences, and understanding your rights and how to advocate for them is essential. So today we'll cover things like what form sexual harassment can take, what barriers might prevent reporting, some laws and obligations of employers, and what steps you can take to respond. So sexual harassment is definitely a very real and important issue that can affect anyone, and we hope that this session will equip you with the knowledge and resources to feel more confident in navigating these very challenging situations. So without further ado, I will leave it to folks to introduce themselves. So take it away, Bree.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bree. I'm your Vice President of Student Health and Wellness at the TCSA. So I deal with things like student benefits, mental health resources, sexual health, anything that you might need, or if you just need a resource and aren't really sure where to go, you can always come to our office and I can be there to help you. But yeah.
Anne-Marie, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Hi there, I'm Anne-Marie Langan. I'm one of the lawyers at the Peterborough Community Legal Center. And my role there is to manage the sexual violence projects. So that includes things like sexual harassment in the workplace, but I'm also working on projects to do with sexual assault and intimate partner violence, providing legal education and legal advice and just ongoing support with dealing with different legal systems.
Hi, folks. My name is Kristen Haines. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the manager of sexual violence prevention and response here at Trent. Along with Sarah, Consent at Trent provides survivor support, education, advocacy, lots of different kind of community engagement opportunities, workshops, trainings, kind of everything across the board around gender-based violence and sexual violence. Really excited to be here with this whole team today. I think that for a lot of us as employees, as workers, sometimes we don't know what our rights are in the workplace. So really great to be having this conversation and hoping to kind of start that conversation for folks who might be curious about what that looks like in the workplace as students, then also as you move into your professional careers as well. So really excited to be here with all of you.
Awesome. All right, and then I'll go. So my name is Sarah Simpson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Coordinator here at Trent University. So I work very closely with Kristen Haines. So yeah, very similarly to what Kristen already said, we offer support, resources, education around consent, sexual violence, gender-based violence. And a lot of what my role is around building capacity within the community around preventing, disrupting sexual violence, as well as bolstering supports for folks who have this lived experience and how we can show up for them in a good way. And making sure we're using trauma-informed and survivor-centered approaches throughout. Really looking at things like resource development, community partnerships with both on-campus and off-campus partners, just like today, and as well as supporting survivors in our community. So that's a little bit about what I do, and we'll get into what we're doing today.
And I think in all of that, I forgot to introduce myself as well. I'm Hannah Neff, and I'm a career resource advisor with Careerspace. So in Careerspace, we're here to help with all different types of services and resources and supports to help you in your career development. And that definitely includes helping you be informed and be safe and comfortable in your workplace experiences, whether that's experiential learning or throughout your career. We are always here and available to support you as alumni and students. So you can always come back and reach out to us for support as well. And I'll pass it back over to you, Sarah.
Amazing. Thank you, Hannah. Also so important to like shout out all the collaborators. It's definitely much a community effort to get this going. So it's always so good to hear from everyone. So before we kind of jump into the content itself, do you want to kind of do a brief little check-in, recognizing we are going to be talking about some heavy topics today, themes of harassment, sexual violence, gender-based violence, different forms of harm that we know are pervasive in our communities, both on campus and off campus. So recognizing that it's a tough topic, we want to make sure that folks are taking care of themselves in the ways that they know work for them. So really important you take breaks when you need, grab a drink of water. If you're watching this later, feel free to pause, do what you need to do. As well, if you're here in the moment, you can DM Kristen for support. She's available for some active listening, can support with finding other resources. And Kristen and I will be available after if you want to kind of chat and check in. As well, I recognize that you folks already have probably lots of resources, lots of self-care strategies to use in the moment. So make sure you're kind of tapping into those as you go. And I will be putting in a resource quickly into the chat as well. So you'll have something there as well. All right, so a little bit around how to participate, recognizing that we are meeting today virtually, but we do still want to make sure that this is an interactive activity and program. So take up space, ask questions, feel free to interrupt Anne-Marie or myself as we're chatting through. Always so good to actually hear folks thinking through these things and processing the information in real time and seeing where we can kind of take that in terms of different discussion questions. So feel free to raise your virtual hand, feel free to just unmute yourself or put your question in the chat to get our attention, and then we will make sure we kind of get to you in a good time. And of course, bring in your experiential knowledge, recognizing that oftentimes people in sort of our professional roles hold this kind of view of being expert. And I know that's definitely not how we ourselves really see ourselves and approach this work. So just know that we value everyone's lived experience and everyone's knowledge, and there's always so much space for all of us to be learners in the space today. And then I'll bring it over to Anne-Marie if you kind of want to go over our agenda for the day.
So as we just started with a little introduction, and from there, we're going to get into what is workplace sexual harassment, the who, what, and where of sexual harassment. And then Sarah's going to give you a little overview of the policies in Trent and student experience at Trent in terms of, what kinds of settings could you experience sexual harassment and what could you do in those various settings. And then we're going to talk about employers' legal responsibilities when it comes to sexual harassment in the workplace. And from there, we're going to go on and look at some legal options that people have when they experience sexual harassment in the workplace. What legal venues can you go to for relief? And at the end, we will give you some information about resources available so that you can get more information and get support in these circumstances. So I'm working right now at the Peterborough Community Legal Center, and the Legal Center offers way more than just the projects that I'm working on. They have services around housing issues. They have services around benefits. So for example, if you get denied a benefit and you need to appeal it, they can assist with that. And they have services around employment in general, so not just as it relates to sexual harassment. So if you have any legal questions, general legal questions, the best thing to do is just to call the Legal Center and you can get some summary legal advice. And if it's not something that the legal clinic does, then they will find a way to provide you with a referral. And specifically, I'm working on this project called Sexual Harassment Advice, Prevention, and Education, so SHAPE for short. And what that is, it's a collaboration between 20 different legal clinics across Ontario who've been funded by the federal government to provide public legal education about your rights and employers' rights when it comes to sexual harassment in the workplace. And the reason why this funding was given to these 20 community legal clinics was because at one point the federal government was actually sued by a group of RCMP police officers who had experienced harassment in their workplace and ended up having to leave the RCMP. And as part of their settlement with those officers, they agreed to sponsor projects like this. So that's where the funding for this project comes from. And so what we do is we can actually provide legal advice to you if you've experienced sexual harassment. So again, you call the Peterborough Community Legal Clinic, they'll put you through to me, and I will talk to you about your situation and give you as much information as I can about what your options are, and we can go from there.
Amazing. Also, so good to always hear like what's happening outside the community around these different issues. So, and on that note, I'll talk a little bit about the work that Consent at Trent does within the Trent University context. So both Kristen and I work within sexual violence prevention and response at the university. And that can look very different kind of case to case. That's kind of part of what we do in the work. It's always very tailored to each student's experience, what their hopes and needs are, and really making sure we're creating lots of choice and options within that. But a broad overview is we offer support, resources, and education around consent, gender-based violence, and sexual violence. And again, so we're a small but mighty team of 2. And we're always really eager to hear from the community what they want to see in terms of events, in terms of programming, or if there's any gaps that they're also identifying. We're always very open to that. So you'll find our contact information is at the bottom there, and we'll make sure we share it as well at the end of the presentation. All right, now getting into, I feel like, the meat of the workshop.
The meat of the, yeah. So there's a lot of misinformation and myths out there about workplace sexual harassment. So I think it's really important to start this workshop with basically what is workplace sexual harassment? Who are the perpetrators of sexual harassment? What does it look like? And where does it occur? So let's start with a definition that comes from the Ontario Health and Safety Act.
Do we want to do one of our quick polls first, and then we go into the
Yeah, I guess we could. I just thought, yeah, okay, we could for
yeah,
sure.
Okay, we can kind of test the waters a little bit.
Yes.
Okay.
Check out my glasses. True or false? Sexual harassment. So first question is true or false? Sexual harassment is just part of your job or industry. Has everyone answered? So we have 100% of respondents saying false, and I'm glad to know that everybody knows that sexual harassment can never be a part of your job, and in fact, it has to be illegal in every workplace in Ontario. So we could do the next question. True or false? Oh, it didn't go to the next one.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Let's see. There we go. Try now. So sorry, folks. This keeps letting
okay.
Not
techie problems. It's okay. We could just move on.
We're gonna skip it. Yeah, sounds good. We'll get into the definition.
So the Ontario Health and Safety Act is the act that governs safety in general at work. And recently, maybe within the last 10 years, they amended the act to specifically reference sexual harassment. And their definition of sexual harassment is what you see here. So the first part of the definition is engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace where the comment or conduct is known or ought to be known to be unwelcome. And the second part of the definition is to do with people in positions of power. And it says making a sexual advance or solicitation where the person making the advance is in a position to grant or deny a benefit to the worker. So what's happened with these definitions is that over time, tribunals and courts have interpreted them. And so things like, for example, what does it mean to engage in a course of vexatious comment or conduct? What does that look like in reality in the case law? And then who is a worker? So that question's come up in a variety of cases, and we'll look at all the different ways that courts and tribunals have seen worker in that definition. And even the workplace, like, so workplace can be very, very depending on what you do. And there's even been case laws you will see as we go on about that. So let's start with who is a worker. Pretty much, so worker, I think most people would think a worker is the first part there, someone who performs work for an employer for wages. That's the general definition of a worker. But in the context of sexual harassment, it actually also includes people who are volunteering, so aren't making money, but they're part of your workplace. Or somebody who's coming into your workplace, like a Purelator courier, or a delivery person, or a person doing a contract for your employer, can be a worker. And also somebody who comes to do training with the employer, even if they don't ever become an employee, is considered a worker under the definition. And people like migrant workers, foreign workers, or temporary workers, even though they don't have solid immigration status in Canada, they still are considered workers for the purpose of this definition. And in terms of what is the workplace, so again, the definition in the Act is any land, premises, location, or thing upon, in, or near which a worker does. So it's actually fairly broad already, but it's even been interpreted even more broadly than that. So for example, a workplace in terms of sexual harassment can be the office Christmas party at a restaurant. So it may not even be at the workplace. It may be in another location, but it's associated with your work. So at the end of the day, if something happens during that party, in the nature of sexual harassment, that can impact your ability to feel safe at work. Is the next slide? Yes. So, the next slide talks about specifically with respect to Trent. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, so with that kind of piece around kind of like what counts as a worker, also want to recognize the context of Trent University as a whole, recognizing that that's definitely foundation or anchor point for this workshop, for this recording. So recognizing that, the work we're talking about today, the different information definitely does also include students who are in co-op placements, who are in practicums, so folks who are maybe in like a social work program, a nursing program, but also has like on-the-job learning experiences, as well as people with like experiential learning opportunities, as well as co-op placements. So that would be like a paid internship as part of your degree requirements. Also recognizing that Trent University as well is an employer, right? We actually have lots of employees. So whether that's people who work on campus, such as Johns, RLCs, TAs, RAs, researchers or research assistants, as well faculty, professors, and then also looking at some of the services, such as our campus stores, food services, library, definitely lots of people that keep the machine of Trent up and running. And then also considering people who are, obviously connected to the university students, but also who are working outside of the campus, right? So folks who work off campus, maybe in part-time or full-time positions. And then again, also looking at how, violence can occur as well when we are socializing with coworkers, whether that's in or out of the office, just like Anne-Marie was saying, with sort of the Christmas party idea. So looking at that and recognizing how, how does dual relationship kind of come into this, recognizing if we're also friends with the folks that we work with. And also keeping in mind digital and online mediums of communication, recognizing sometimes that gets a little bit overlooked, thinking that forms of violence have to be in person or IRL, when in reality, emails, text messages, social media, all of those instances or locations are also instances or other locations where sexual harassment can take place as well. So important that we keep in mind the realities of how we're actually communicating and how we're in relationship with each other. Oh, so sorry, Anne-Marie, I think you're muted.
I was just saying that, yeah, the golden rule is treat everybody, all of your coworkers, anybody that you work with or interact with at the university with respect. And if everybody did that, we wouldn't even need to have this presentation. We would be good. But one question that I get a lot from people is, is it sexual harassment if the person who perpetrated the sexual harassment didn't mean to. They didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. They didn't mean, they're just joking. That you hear that all the time. Oh, it's just a joke, right? So is that important what their intention was in making the comment or in the behavior? So it's not completely irrelevant because, as you saw in the definition, part of the definition is known or ought to have known that the behavior was unwelcome. So you do have to either show that the behavior is so ridiculous and so outside of the norm that anybody witnessing that behavior would consider it harassment, or you have to show that you, in some way, have let the person know that their behavior is not welcome and that it's making you feel unsafe and uncomfortable in your workplace. And there's various ways of doing that depending on who the person is and your level of safety. You could do that by putting it in writing. I highly recommend that people do that if they feel safe in doing it, that they put things in writing, because then later on, if you do end up having to do some kind of a court proceeding, you have very good evidence that you told that person very clearly that this behavior, whatever the behavior is making you feel uncomfortable at work, and it's interfering with your ability to feel safe at work. You don't have to word it that way, but just make it clear it's unwanted, it's not wanted. And the other way you can do it is by doing it verbally, but in the presence of somebody else that you can trust to make a statement on your behalf in the future if ever you needed to have evidence that you did tell the person that their behavior was unwelcome. And I saw something in the chat, but I didn't catch what it was. How should you put it in writing? Yeah, see, I think that's the hard part. So that's where I would recommend, if you're not sure, there are 20 legal clinics out there who can help you with that. So I would just make a call to one of those legal clinics, or go see a counselor at school or somebody who might be able to help you work through what to say and how to say it in a way that makes it really clear how you feel and what exactly it is that's making you feel uncomfortable. Because the more specific you can be about that, the better off you'll be in the long run if you need to use it to enforce your rights. And then second part of that is, like I said, so some kinds of behaviors are so egregious that pretty much anybody would know that they're inappropriate, right? So the problem with that, though, is, and I've had this question too, is like, so what do you do in a workplace where everyone behaves that way? And there are workplaces like that where everyone's constantly making inappropriate jokes and people are always bantering around sexual things. And a lot of people feel, oh, I'm the only one feeling uncomfortable, which I almost can guarantee you is not true. It's just that people have a very hard time speaking up about those things, especially in those work environments. So nevertheless, if you describe the behavior, and again, you tell the person that it's unwanted, and you describe exactly what's unwanted, and then go before a tribunal member would be able to see that behavior as being inappropriate. So it's the average person, not the average person in your workplace, is the reference point. So there's a whole gamut of behavior that could be considered sexual harassment, and it's really very context specific. It's specific to the kind of relationship, the power dynamics, and a lot of different things. However, just to give you some general idea, we'll go through the different categories. So first, visual. So these are things that you might be very familiar with, like people sending nude pictures, or even something as much as a stare, a way of looking at somebody, could be sexual harassment. Or having, images around your desk or around your workstation that are very explicit, that could make somebody else feel uncomfortable. That could be sexual harassment. Definitely exposing your private parts would absolutely fall within that ought to have known category. It's definitely sexual harassment. And using intimidating gestures. So as you see, even just from these few examples, you've got the whole gamut there of different the different levels of sexual harassment, and is very context specific. Verbal. So as I mentioned already, things like jokes. And then also verbal harassment can be, constantly asking somebody out, or, going after them to be in an intimate relationship, and that person saying no, or showing in some way. It doesn't have to be in writing. It doesn't even have to be verbal. It can be with your body language. You're letting that person know by backing off and looking uncomfortable that you're not interested. If they continue to do that, to continue to go after you in that way, that's definitely sexual harassment. But what's interesting too is that comments don't have to be positive to be sexual harassment. So some of the case law has found, for example, that a cook who kept making demeaning comments about another female cook's appearance in the workplace, that was considered sexual harassment, even though it was of a negative nature. Definitely comments about people's gender identity or gender expression that are, negative, or that call into question the validity of those things. Definitely things like text messages, emails, notes, or letters with inappropriate language that are demeaning, that are sexually explicit. Those can all be sexual harassment. And also just being very intrusive and not having appropriate boundaries around people's personal life, and asking them questions about their sex life, or spreading rumors about them sleeping with somebody else in the office, or things like that. That can all be sexual harassment. Verbal nature. And then physical, I think, is the one most people are familiar with. It would be any form of unwanted touching, kissing or hugging, or even in a lot of cases, what happened was the person just wouldn't give the other person their personal space, even after that person made it clear that they were not interested in them romantically, or did not want them that close to them, always kind of making excuses to be physically close. And then, of course, it can escalate to all kinds of inappropriate touching and grabbing, and sexual assault in some cases. Now, in terms of who can cause sexual harassment, maybe we could do a poll about this. So who do you think is most likely of the groups here to be the perpetrators of sexual harassment? Are we able to do a poll? Or we could just do it in the chat, since there's just a few people.
Yeah, I'm
What
not
do you
sure
think?
what's happening with the polls not being launched, but yeah, so the options are, so who do you think is most likely to cause harassment? A coworker, a customer or a client, or manager? I feel like often when we talk about these things, yeah.
Manager.
Saying manager, that's what I was also thinking too. I'm gonna add that in, manager.
Yes. Okay. So that's what I thought too before I started learning about this. And what I was surprised to discover is that the most likely person to sexually harass you is your client or customer at work. And it's one of the most uncomfortable positions to be in, because, of course, we're all taught that those are the people we're supposed to make happy, right? And so it's very difficult to set limits with them and feel comfortable with that, especially if managers are not being supportive. And so that's where it's really important for managers to make it clear that employees don't actually have to put up with that kind of harassing, disrespectful behavior, and that they will actually step in and do something and ask the person to leave if they're being aggressive, if they're harassing, if they're sexually harassing. And there are some workplaces where that does happen. For example, there was a student that told me that they worked at a Tim Hortons where they had a customer wall of shame, and anytime a customer would be aggressive or harass or sexually harass an employee, they would take a picture from the CCTV footage and put it up on the board, and that person was banned for life. They couldn't come back, even through the drive-through, just not allowed at the restaurant. And I thought that was fabulous because it shows that the manager is dedicated to keeping their employees safe, and that's how it should be. So managers are actually the least likely to sexually harass people. And one of the reasons why I think that might be is because they do have training like this where they learn and understand how inappropriate it is. And they recognize that doing that kind of thing can lead to them losing their employment. It should. So the second most likely are the coworkers and peers in your workplace. And that can be an awkward situation as well because they can be your friends. And there's always sort of a group dynamic. And if you tell on one of your coworkers, very often you can feel like you might be excluded or whatever from your workplace. But the interesting thing is that if you speak up about it with other coworkers and talk to them, you might find out that they actually feel the same way. And one of the best ways to address sexual harassment in a workplace where there's a person who's constantly behaving inappropriately is to gang up and go together to the manager and report, because in that instance, it makes it much more difficult for managers to overlook and ignore the complaint. And they're much more likely to do something because they don't want to lose all their employees at once. So it's just a thought that in certain circumstances, that might be a strategy that you can think about. Now, I talked a lot about reporting sexual harassment, but the reality of it in the statistics is that about 77% of people do not report incidents of sexual harassment. And that includes to friends and family. They just absolutely do not tell anybody. So question comes up, why? Why is it so difficult for people to report? Well, there's a lot of reasons why people say they don't report. One of them is that they're not clear on what sexual harassment is and whether the behavior would fall into that category. So that's the first thing. Secondly, a lot of people are not clear on what their employer's policies are about sexual harassment or how to report. They're also worried, like I was speaking about before, about the implications of reporting on their relationships with other coworkers, on their careers, and also one of the statistics that I found most interesting is a lot of people were actually worried about the perpetrator. They didn't want them to lose their job. So it was really out of a sense of compassion that they were holding back from reporting. But like I said, often what happens is if a person behaves this way, many people around them are feeling uncomfortable, not just you. So in doing something about it, very often you're not just helping yourself have a better workplace environment, but you're helping other people to have a better workplace environment too. Sarah, did you want to do this one?
Yeah, so kind of going off of Anne-Marie's point around different barriers, also recognizing that there's also different circumstances and context for students specifically, recognizing that there are some additional vulnerabilities. So thinking about folks who are in an experiential learning kind of placement or co-op, right? Recognizing how the success of that placement or co-op also has ramifications on their degree requirements, right? And on them actually completing their diploma, completing their degree. As well, thinking about career implications, right? If they're kind of thinking about, I really need this placement to be a reference so that then I can actually get a job in the field after this placement finishes. Also looking at how international students definitely hold a lot more precarity around actually like having legal status in Canada, having their work visas and things like that. And often there can be a lot of pressure too around not only sort of like them staying in Canada, staying in the area, but also what that means for a family as well. So that can be complicated. Also thinking about job security, obviously, you have to pay the bills. Finances are such a big part of many decisions that we make in our life. So recognizing what that means for rent, food, all that stuff. Also thinking about, what might happen if others find out, thinking about like reputation and kind of rumors, that can be a big issue. And then also just sort of thinking, well, it's actually just sort of nothing's really going to be done about it. They're just assuming that, this is just kind of the norm. So there's no point in speaking out about it. There's no point in getting support. So just recognizing that Some of these pieces, absolutely, there's so much reality and there's so many things that people are up against, and also recognizing that there are people, and we'll get kind of into support, that we can work around some of those barriers and work to see what is possible even with some of those barriers around you.
Sorry, guys, I keep forgetting to unmute. So as an employee in Ontario, as we mentioned, volunteer, anybody working in any kind of workplace in Ontario for free or for remuneration has a right to be safe at work. And safety includes emotional safety. So that's where the sexual harassment comes in.
All right, so I'm just going to touch briefly on the Trent University sexual violence policy, recognizing that this piece is a big part of the work that Kristen and I do, and definitely really directs a lot of what it looks like in terms of student support and sort of responsibilities of the community. So recognizing that at Trent University as a whole, everyone has a collective responsibility not to perpetrate sexual violence or perpetuate rape culture, recognizing that we all have a place and a role to play in terms of actually acting as an active bystander, doing interventions when possible, as well as supporting survivors in a positive way as well, making sure it's also survivor centered and trauma informed as well. And as well, so looking at how, so the Trent sexual violence policy is very much around sort of student support and recognizing sort of different policies and kind of pieces around students as complainants around sexual violence. And there's also policies at the university that kind of cover also looking at workers and thinking about workplace sexual harassment and how those pieces kind of come together. So there's also the workplace violence and harassment policy, which is actually under review right now. So there's actually an opportunity if anyone's interested. They're taking community input on it, so you can actually get your voice heard on that. As well, there's also the discrimination and harassment policy. Both of those two are actually housed under human resources. As well, thinking about how these different kind of policies come together, as well as looking through like experiential learning opportunities, placements, co-ops, and things like that. So also important to recognize that employees of institutes that provide placement are not covered by any policies, but the university will engage in discussions with students and placement agency to take steps to address complaints. So recognizing that there are some gaps in looking at some of these pieces as a larger picture within Ontario. So this is one thing that I know is definitely on all of our radars as sort of our different places, our different leadership roles and our different parts of the university as well as the community. And also recognizing that we also can work together and work through some of those gaps and still find ways to create support, ways to create safety that are also on, as much as possible, the students' terms. I'll bring it over back to you.
Okay, so what are the specific obligations of every employer in Ontario? So the main one, the first one, and that this has always been true for a very long time, is that employers must have a written workplace policy about sexual harassment specifically. And in fact, they're supposed to actually post that policy in a place where employees hang out, like the staff lunchroom or a place like that. So you should be able to know. And then definitely you should have been provided with that policy and training about the policy at least once when you were initially hired, but ideally it would be like once a year that employers should be training employees and providing them with reminders about their duty to keep a respectful and emotionally safe work environment. So when an employer becomes aware of, and to be clear, you don't have to necessarily report it if it's obvious. The employer should be able to address a situation where there's clearly toxic behavior going on, even without a complaint. And once they do recognize that there's a problem, they need to have an investigation into what happened, and they need to actually provide a result. So the result could be, if there is a complaint and they felt that there was not enough evidence to substantiate the complaint, the result could be, well, we're just dismissing the investigation. But if there is a substantiation of the complaint, then there should be a consequence. And the consequence should be commensurate, as they say, with the behavior. So if it was very serious, like for example, there was a sexual assault, then the person employment might be terminated immediately. If it was a joke or a comment or something like that, maybe it would be, the person might be sent for counseling, for training on how to behave more respectfully in the workplace. The employer has a duty to prevent harassment, not just to address it. So that's where it's important for employers to make it clear in their policy what behavior constitutes harassment and violence. Like where are the parameters there? And to have very clear procedures in place for people to report and an alternative. So it's really important that there not just be one person to report to in the workplace in case that person happens to be the source of the harassment or the best friend of the source of the harassment. There should be an outside source that people can report to in that event. And then more and more, the courts are saying it's not okay to investigate your own complaints because employers very often don't do a very good job. So they recommend that you find a third party and have them do a proper investigation into complaints. And it's super important that they keep the results or the content of the investigation confidential. And the reason for that is because, as we all know, gossip is rampant in workplaces, and it can actually harm the victim as much or more even than the perpetrator for this gossip to get out of control. And at the end of the day, their employer is supposed to tell both parties what the outcome of their investigation is and what the consequences are going to be if the behavior is substantiated. Now, what I always tell people is please keep a record as much as possible of what happened. And so kinds of records that can be really helpful are, like I mentioned, CCTV camera footage. And something to know about that is that CCTV camera footage is often overwritten after a certain number of days or even hours, depending on the workplace. So if you do want to capture an incident that is on CCTV recording, it's very important to ask for it right away and to get them to make a copy for you so you can keep that. You can also write reports to your employer. You can write emails or texts to the person perpetrating the harassment to let them know what happened. You can get statements from people around you that witnessed what happened. And you should definitely keep any evidence like text, inappropriate text, photos, or recorded Zoom calls where the harassment occurred. And even if you can't right away tell somebody, okay, you're making me feel uncomfortable in writing, say it verbally, and then you can go back later and send an email saying, well, I just want to confirm that today I told you blah, blah, blah. And in that way, you'll have a written record of what happened. And then an important thing is that in some cases, people will leave their work abruptly when events like this happen. And before you do that, please take any information that you might have on your computer or work-related social media accounts and put them on a USB or some way that you can take outside of work. And that way it can't be erased and your access to it cannot be blocked later on.
Looks like we have a question in the chat. Do employers have a legal obligation to share a recording if asked for it?
So I would say in this circumstance, absolutely yes, because ultimately they're the ones who should be paying attention. So if you're asking for evidence that you've been harassed in your own workplace, they absolutely should be getting a copy of that footage if there is some for you. Just that most people don't understand the timing thing, that it can often be overwritten. So they wait too long, and then by the time they go back to the employer, it's too late. God. So when someone comes to me and says they've been sexually harassed, there's a variety of options depending on, again, the context. So if they work for the average employer in Ontario, I often recommend that we take the matter to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. And they're there to enforce the Human Rights Code, part of which talks about the right to equal treatment with respect to employment without discrimination or harassment. And so you can enforce your right to a harassment-free work environment when it relates to something like gender or gender identity, sexual orientation, anything that's sexual related, you can enforce through the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. Then if you work for a federally regulated employer, so there's a whole list of what that might be, but includes things like banks and airlines, and then of course any kind of federal government employer like the RCMP, the military, the tax department, all these people that are governed by the federal government regulations. Then you have to actually start at the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And from there, if the matter isn't settled, you may be referred to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal for a hearing. And then just another thing to point out is we looked over the Ontario Health and Safety Act regulations about sexual harassment, but there's similar and actually even clearer regulations in the Canada Labour Code, which governs federally regulated employees. Now, there's some circumstances in which people involve the police. They actually make a report to the police about the sexual harassment / assault. And harassment actually is a criminal offense. The problem is under the criminal code, for someone to be found guilty, you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that it's the only reasonable explanation. And since these cases very often have a lot of gray areas in them, the police don't actually like to charge people with harassment. And however, I always encourage people, if they feel that it's criminal behavior, even if you don't have the evidence, make the report, because then you have a piece of evidence there that you reported to the police, and there'll be a police report. And then another option a lot of people don't think about is the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. So any person who is injured in Ontario at work or doing a work-related thing can make a claim to the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. And this includes injuries to your mental health. So traumatic injuries. So for example, if something very traumatic happened at work of a sexual harassment nature or sexual assault, and then now you can't work anymore because of the emotional impact of this event, you can make a claim for Workplace Safety Insurance Board benefits, and they will give you things like maybe funds for treatment, help getting another job if you need to move on to another job because you can't return to that workplace, maybe loss of earnings. So if you're unable to work and you've lost earnings because of it, they may do some income replacement benefits. So those are the kinds of things you can get from the Workplace Safety Insurance Act. And you need to apply for that within 6 months of the workplace injury. So that's just something to keep in mind because it's a short time frame. And then if your workplace is unionized, I highly recommend that you file a grievance. And again, it's kind of like the criminal report, because if you file a grievance, you now have a report outlining exactly what happened. And that makes really good evidence later on, even if your grievance doesn't go any further than that initial stage of bringing it to the union. But if your grievance is successful, it will be taken to the Ontario Labour Relations Board. And there's a tribunal, there are a tribunal that actually will make a decision and give you an award and damages for what you experienced if it isn't resolved. So there's other places you can go for help. So we're just going to give you some ideas of where you can go to get some further information and assistance on these issues. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Peterborough Community Legal Centre offers free legal advice to workers about their legal rights, and sometimes representation as well, in terms of going to the Human Rights Tribunal because you've been discriminated against or sexually harassed. And in terms of referrals, we are aware of other resources available in the community that we can refer people to get services that the legal clinic doesn't offer. And also in some situations, like for example, if your job was also related to your housing, like a migrant worker's is, then you might have a legal housing issue as well. So the legal clinic has a lot of expertise in that area because that's something that legal clinics have been doing for decades. And we also do what we're doing today. So we provide public legal education for students, and we also actually provide public legal education for employers on how to respond appropriately to sexual harassment in the workplace.
Actually, I have a question. So I know we obviously work closely if there's referrals kind of between the two. I'm curious as well, are there any sort of advice you would give if, let's say, a student like wants to self-refer or get connected up with the Peterborough Community Legal Center?
Yeah, so what I recommend is that so we have an intake worker, a very kind gentleman called Jesse. So if you call, that's what will happen. You'll speak to Jesse, and Jesse will take your information. And then depending on what the issue is, so if it's housing, there's certain lawyers that work on housing. If it's employment, there's certain lawyers that work on employment. And if it's sexual harassment, in all likelihood, you'll end up with me as the person you're referred to. And then we'll call you back and get more information and go from there.
Okay, so there would be some level of disclosure so that Jesse can actually make sure people are getting connected up with the appropriate lawyer then.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
But Jesse is not a lawyer. So Jesse would just take the information and make the determination as to who the best person for it to go to would be.
Awesome. Okay.
And I'm not sure if the chat is included in the recording, so I'll just share the phone number is 705-749-9355. And the website is www.ptbo-clc.org.
Thank you. And then the special project that I'm working on at the legal clinic is called SHAPE, as I mentioned earlier, Sexual Harassment Advice, Prevention, and Education. And this project is specifically about sexual harassment in the workplace. And so that's why if you called with a question, an employment law issue related to sexual harassment, you would be sent to me for advice. But there's also 19 other legal clinics doing this. And so if you are going to school at Trent, but you live in Toronto, there's a few in Toronto, or if you live in Windsor, there's one in Windsor, there's some in Sudbury, and just all over the map. So, and pretty much anywhere you are, if you call your community legal clinic, you'll be able to get somebody there, or they will tell you which of the clinics can assist you with your legal matter. And then we can offer free training and legal education locally or online like this. We've offered it actually quite widely across Canada. And we also can make referrals to community organizations that are related specifically to issues around sexual harassment.
And if folks aren't sure what their local legal clinic is, would that just be searching through Legal Aid Ontario? Or
yeah, so if you just do Legal Aid Ontario Legal Clinic, it'll pop up the site of Legal Aid Ontario where they have like a whole, well, actually a search engine. So you put in your town and they'll tell you which legal clinic to go to from there.
Great.
And the SHAPE website, sorry.
No, go ahead,
the SHAPE website has specific information about the 20 legal clinics that are involved in our project.
Great. And I was just going to share twostepstojustice.ca, which is a resource I share with students a lot. So if you're looking for just answers to questions and resources, that's a great one too.
Amazing. I have a question too. So in thinking about what location of the legal aid to access, would it be more important around the region that your workplace is in or the region that you yourself live in? Are there like parameters or rules around that?
No, well, I'd say it's where you were at that. Well, yes, there kind of is. So the way that the intake process works is they ask you for your address and they determine whether you are within their catchment area. And if you're not, then they would refer you to the clinic that is. However, with this sexual harassment project, we have blurred the boundaries. So because some clinics are not offering it. So for example, Kingston doesn't offer it. So the legal clinic I used to work at in Perth took over any Kingston people that had issues with sexual harassment.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So and that's the thing, is catchment area can be, they're specific to different regions and agencies themselves. So thank you for kind of going over that. So then considering our side of things, consent at Trent. So like, Kristen and I kind of talked a little bit about, so we offer pieces or resources, support education around sexual violence prevention and as well as response. So in terms of that support, in terms of like a one-on-one capacity, so we don't offer counseling, although that's definitely part of our training, but we offer more sort of like active listening, supportive listening, coaching, psychoeducation around trauma, different things like that. As well, we can support students in accessing academic accommodations, whether that's formal or informal, and advocating with their professors, TAs, things like that. And as well, that could also look into accommodations relating to a workplace, a placement, I think things like that as well. We also do lots of work around advocacy, right? Whether there's different things around, let's say, OSAP or other sort of big players, and kind of making sure survivors' voices are being heard appropriately when they want to be heard. Also, we do lots of outreach. So if, let's say, clients, students want to actually be accompanied to, let's say, a court or another appointment, let's say at a medical center, anything like that, we can absolutely go with them and accompany them out in the community. We also do lots of referrals. So depending on what sort of needs the students are voicing and what they're actually hoping to see in their future and get connected up with, we can offer different ideas and referrals around on-campus supports as well as off-campus supports. So whether that's like Kawartha Sexual Assault Center, Durham Rape Crisis Center, there's lots of other communities and agencies that offer support. So we make sure it's specific to the student and what sort of experiences are coming up for them, as well as their intersectional identity. We also offer support in helping folks navigate different reporting options, recognizing that coming to us, disclosing to Kristen or myself actually does not count as any sort of formal report. And that information stays with us unless it crosses bounds of our limitations of confidentiality, which are pretty standard in sort of social work domain. So with that said, so in recognizing the steps being taken in reporting, it's really important that we try to make space for folks to have that be an informed decision. So we kind of can chat through that, what that can look like, what folks might be able to expect, and what their options are for both like internal reporting options, both like with campus security, our like conduct coordinator, things like that, as well as external different options, legal options that Anne-Marie already kind of touched on as well. And we can also chat through safety planning, whether that's like practicals, safety planning, as well as thinking about our felt sense of safety. So important too that we feel empowered in making ourselves feel safe and grounded. And are just recognizing too, our services are available to people of all genders, diverse lived experiences, recognizing that there's always things that we can do to make our work more accessible. So if there's ever any special requests, we're always happy to meet folks where they're at to see what we can do differently and how we can better serve the community. As well, we're also available for in-person, over Zoom, telephone, and also email. So we try to, again, lots of ways of getting connected up with us. And then as we kind of start to wrap up this session, also just kind of quick promo, we do have another Know Your Rights session, which again, Anne-Marie is going to be joining us again. So this one's going to be a bit more broad. So we're actually going to be looking at navigating employment laws in Ontario. So not specifically around sexual harassment in the workplace, but looking at lots of different forms of rights, as well as employer obligations in terms of creating a safe, equitable, enjoyable work environment for everyone to enjoy. So that's going to be Wednesday, October 18th, from 3 to 4 p.m. And you'll, again, similar to how you signed up for this one, it'll be on the student experience portal, and you can also check out our social medias to find that as well. So I think now it looks like actually we'll go into, too far. Ask a lawyer, and then we can kind of wrap up with our contact info. Or do we want to do our contact info first and then for the recording, Hannah? Maybe we'll do that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, Anne-Marie, do you want to kind of shout out how people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, so to get a hold of me, the best way is probably by email because I work remotely. So my email is there, annemarie.langan@ptbo.clcj.ca. But if you call the Peterborough, if you just Google Peterborough Community Legal Center and you call them, they will absolutely get me a message as well. So they will just email me and let me know that you called, and we will go from there.
Amazing. Kristen, do you want to share yours?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually popped my email, my direct email in the chat earlier on as well, but I'll do that again. But the consent@trentu.ca email that you see on the screen here goes directly to Sarah and I. So you can connect in through that route as well. Sarah, I'm assuming you will pop in your email, direct email as well. So a few different routes for folks to connect in with us. We also have an office on the Peterborough campus, a little bit hard to find, but if you do want to come and connect in person, you could definitely shoot us an email and we can tell you where to find us on campus. And we're always kind of keen to support folks who do want to have those in-person sessions or supports as well.
Amazing. And one thing too I should mention as well, just thinking about piece I mentioned around like community referrals. So absolutely, let's say if folks are like curious about connecting up with Anne-Marie or not sure how exactly to do that, that can also be part of our work together, is actually getting community referrals over to the Legal Aid Center. And I know that goes both ways as well from Anne-Marie too. But yeah, I think that kind of wraps up the main kind of content of our workshop, unless Anne-Marie, is there anything you want to say before we get into the question kind of Q&A period?
Well, I think the one piece of advice I would leave you with is if you're in doubt about what to do, reach out for help. So reach out for help from a counselor, reach out for help from the legal clinic, and we'd be happy to help guide you and just give you a sounding board and give you your options so that you can make an informed decision.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And yeah, I think echoing as well, I know Chris and I often tell folks like, you're not alone. We're in this together. And obviously it's like the first step is just accessing support and reaching out. But just know there are a large community around you when or if you're ready to reach out and express your needs. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And feel free to connect with us if there's anything as well you want to see in future around Know Your Rights, workshops you want to see, collaborations. We're always really eager to make sure we're actually serving the community, whether that's on campus and off campus. So yeah, thank you for joining and hope you got something out of this session today.